Hey everyone, welcome to Gen X Mark the Spot. Thank you so much for spending your Friday with me. Today I am blessed beyond blessings to have not only you with me, but my really good friend, Brian Trippett here from the Front Porch Conservative. I'm going to go ahead and bring him on. We're going to be talking about two of our favorite movies, uh, Disney's 1993 Three Musketeers and The Man in the Iron Mask from 1998. Welcome, Brian. How are you tonight?
Thank you, Tracy. It's a pleasure as always to be on your channel. These always are a load of fun, and yeah, I'm looking forward to this. I mean, I was telling you backstage, I had forgotten how much fun these films are just to watch because
Yeah.
I mean, one of them's from '93, one's from like '97 or '98, and I kept thinking to myself throughout, I was like, God, this is how Hollywood used to do it. They used to know how to make a movie that you'd want to sit down and watch, and not just once in the theater, but when it finally, and back then it was, VHS tapes and DVDs and all that
Mhm.
good stuff. And not only are you looking forward to watching it in the movie theater, you're looking forward to watching it at home anytime you want. And I thought, God, this is just so good. The acting, the soundtracks, the everything else. So yeah, the fact we're going to be talking about these two movies tonight, and I mean, and Tracy will tell you the same thing, folks. If you have never seen these two movies, God, you've got to go watch them. They're just that good.
Yes, they are good. And you can find, I believe, Three Musketeers is on Disney Plus if you deign to have Disney Plus, which I do. I'll admit it. I love my Star Wars, gonna have my Star Wars. So I have it. And I believe The Man in the Iron Mask is free with ads on YouTube, or you
Mhm.
can find it, I want to say, on Max if you have a Max subscription. So you can find them very, very easily.
Yeah.
Uh, Probably The Three Musketeers is on YouTube. I didn't look for it, most likely, but anyway, as Brian said, wonderful films, and they're so 90s. Even though they're set in the 17th century, they are so
Yeah.
90s because there is
Yeah.
an all-star cast. There's a swashbuckling story, which happened a lot in the 90s, and there is a power ballad that went along with the movie that tore up the charts, just like
Oh God, yeah.
Brian Adams did with Everything I Do with from Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, also from the same era. You had a Sting, a Brian Adams, ironically, and Rod Stewart tearing it up with All for Love that came from Three Musketeers.
Yep. Yeah, and on top of that, you've got with the Three Musketeers probably one of the finest composers in all of Hollywood, and still, and as far as I know, is still with us,
Mm-hmm.
Michael Kamen, who
Mm-hmm.
had so many great soundtracks in the '80s, '90s, and early 2000s. But you can tell, I mean, if there's anything that's a signature to these composers, Kamen loves his horns. You get a lot of silver trumpet, you get a lot of trumpet blasts, and that the music in the Three Musketeers is so rich and so luxurious.
Mm-hmm.
You just feel like, yeah, yeah. If you're riding a horse through Paris, this is the kind of music you're going to hear, and
Oh yeah,
it's just gloriously good fun.
yeah. They put a lot of work into this. They really did. But both great movies. I love them both for very different reasons and for very similar reasons, which we'll talk about. So these are both 10 out of 10s for me. I'm not even going to wait till the
Yeah.
end to give my rating, but I do want to talk about them a little bit more. But why the Three Musketeers and the Man in the Iron Mask? Well, these were kind of historical stories based on real life people, kind of, sort of, maybe. And the only reason I say that is that Alexander Dumas was a very popular French serial writer and novelist that lived in the 1800s, and he lived in 19th century France. And during that time, he made his living writing serials. These were stories told in multiple parts that came out weekly in certain publications, and people would stand in line. Yes, yes, Adam, he was. I try not to. I don't even dwell on things like that, but yes, he was. He was French and I believe Caribbean. in Descent.
Question.
Hmm.
Question. How did you pronounce his last name?
Dumois.
Now wait a minute. I thought the correct pronunciation of that is dumbass. That's what that guy in the Shawshank Redemption said. I mean, am I wrong about this? I mean, straighten me out here. Who ever heard of Alexander Dumas? Dumbass.
I used to, when I
I
was a
couldn't get
kid, I
this.
called him Alexander Dumas. But
I
then
had the same
I
pronunciation.
was actually corrected by a friend of mine that does speak actual French, and he said, no, it's Dumois. So
Dumois.
Dumois.
Dumois. Okay. Dumois.
But anyway, so yes, he was of Caribbean and French descent, kind of like Chauvin, which we just got a movie about recently. But anyway, so he wrote for serials in that you would go buy these certain publications and you would get a continuing story. So the Three Musketeers and The Man in the Iron Mask are essentially one big novel, even though they've been split into separate novels over the course of the years just because they're massive. But
Yeah.
basically, you have at least the Three Musketeers part that was told in serials, and then they were combined into the novel. If you've ever read the novel, you know that there's a lot of repetition. And that's because when they put the novel together, they didn't take out like the recaps that he had to put into every episode so you remember what happened last week. It's kind of like the last week on The Walking Dead kind of thing. It's
Mm.
last week on the Three Musketeers. So anyway, so it's a very long novel with a lot of repetition. But basically, there was a real life D'Artagnan. He served in the Musketeers and in the French army, and earlier on in the 17th century, which is where the setting of the Three Musketeers, and his story was told orally, as it was a lot, and Dumois caught on to him as the hero of a swashbuckling adventure, as well as his obsession with the Musketeers in general. The Musketeers were a real live security regiment for the French king. Can think of them like the Secret Service, although they're a little bit different. But they did serve to protect the king, and they fought personal wars for the king, very well documented. And so he wrote this as kind of a swashbuckling adventure. Basically, it starred D'Artagnan as the star, and then you had Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, who were just basically they called them the inseparables in the novel because they were always together. And basically, the gist of it is you had D'Artagnan coming into Paris on basically sent there by his father to join the Musketeers. He had given him two directives: if someone insults you, fight them; if someone and do not sell the horse I'm giving you. Well, he's basically picking fights his entire way from his home into Paris and ends up
Hmm.
fighting several duels before he gets into Paris. And then as soon as he gets there, he sells the horse. So it's just kind of thing. He goes to the captain of the Musketeers and asks to be placed, and he tells him, well, you can't do that unless you serve in another regiment or you created some or you've done some very heroic deed. You can't be commissioned for the Musketeers. But in the meantime, he goes out, and in his dilemma, he manages to insult all three of the Three Musketeers. And it's separate, but he manages to challenge their honor in some way. And so they all challenge him to a duel. So he schedules a duel with each of them 1 hour apart in the same area. Well, they all come to each other's duel as a second. And they get there, and there's the famous scene: I have a duel with this man. I have a duel with this man. I have a duel with this man. And basically, it ends with D'Artagnan going, well, Athos has the right to kill me first, en garde. And so they end up starting their duel. And then the cardinal, now, Cardinal Richelieu is a historical figure. He was cardinal at the time of Louis the 13th. And there was kind of a mini war between the cardinal and the king. Somehow, because of Catholic Church maneuvers, you had literally the clergy as powerful as the king in France during that time period. So there was some headbutting there, and so the cardinal's guards try to arrest them because there's a law against dueling, and they end up fighting together, defeating the Cardinal's guards, and then basically D'Artagnan is adopted by the Musketeers. Then there's a whole lot of political intrigue with Queen Anne, who is the Queen of Louis XIII, having an affair with the Duke of Buckingham in France and England, and some missing diamonds, and they go to England to try to get the diamonds. And then there's a woman by the name of Milady de Winter, who works for the Cardinals, out to get the Queen and the King and everyone else. And so a lot of political intrigue. And then 20, 30 years, then you have two more sets of serials just about the D'Artagnan, because D'Artagnan stays in the Musketeers, the others retire. You have more novels of D'Artagnan's adventures. And the final story is The Man in the Iron Mask, which is all the Musketeers, including D'Artagnan, coming back together for one more adventure to essentially solve the mystery of the Man in the Iron Mask in a roundabout way. Now, the Man in the Iron Mask is a historical prisoner that was held in the Bastille in the late 1700s, and it's still a mystery as to who he actually was. He was held there during the reign of Louis XIV, which is Louis XIII's and Queen Anne's son. And there's all kinds of speculation about who he actually was. One of the many stories that got around was he was the disabled older brother to Louis XIV that was held there, so there wouldn't be any dispute over the throne. Then there was another story that he was the king's long lost twin that had been hidden there, so there wouldn't be anarchy. And then the other more likely identification was that he was a diplomat of the king's, namely his Secretary of War, who messed up one of the Louis XIV's many wars. Like he fought the 80 Years' War, he fought the Dutch, he fought so many people. He was a Secretary of War that basically screwed up a couple of battles, and Louis threw him in a velvet mask. It was not an actual iron mask, but threw him in an iron velvet mask and threw him in the Bastille, and all the rumors about its iron. Even Voltaire was imprisoned there because Voltaire made his living rigging lotteries, believe it or not, before he became a fancy liberal, writer. So that's what it was. There was also a rumor that maybe it was the real father of Louis XIV, because Louis XIII was really old when Anne got pregnant. So there was a rumor that maybe her and Cardinal Richelieu, who was still around, had a kind of brought in a pinch hitter to father their heir. So,
well, anyway, you gotta do what you gotta do.
No one knows who the true Man in the Iron Mask was, but Dumas, of course, took the story and put D'Artagnan in the middle of it, and eventually you have the final resolution to the Three Musketeers story. So that's a little bit on the history of where the stories came from. Sort of based in fact, but not really.
Very, very true. And the part about the thing that most people don't realize, talking about Richelieu, you're right. There was a point when the cardinals outside of Rome at a certain period of history were just extraordinarily powerful. Now, France being a little bit different from England, because England had broken. Now, let's see. Hang on.
Absolutely, Robert.
Richelieu was in the 17th century. So, oh no, I'm sorry. By that point, England was well on its way to shaking off the chains of Roman Catholic dominance. So by that point, the Anglican Church was in full. But in France, the Catholic Church was still at the height of its power, and Richelieu was just extraordinary as a political figure. I mean, for about a good, if my memory serves right, about a good 30, 40 years, that man was the literal power behind the throne.
He was. I mean, he did rule France for the most part.
More or less.
He stopped a lot of wars. I mean, he stopped a lot of battles, because he would negotiate literally behind the throne's back to stop heinous shit from happening. And actually, in the novel, Dumas does not paint him as a villain. He's painted as a villain in a lot of the adaptions. Yeah, but he's not a villain. He's a very neutral figure that's just trying to do his job, but he's also willing to take people out of the way that are getting in getting his way, and oftentimes that includes murder. And if you've never seen or read about the Borgias and the Machiavellis and the ruling families in the Catholic Church, and yes, there are ruling families in the Catholic Church, none of them had any qualms about killing to protect their interest.
Yeah, imagine Cardinal Richelieu as France's early version of Dick Cheney. Okay,
Yeah.
that's probably a good way to describe
Hmm.
him.
Hmm.
Don't know that he was winging his best friends when they went out hunting or whatever, but yeah, you get the general idea.
Yeah.
That was Richelieu.
Yeah.
A lot of wheeling and dealing, a lot of stuff going on, and you know, yeah, very true. Yeah, Adam, you're absolutely right. She had Walsingham, although interestingly, Walsingham in the films that were done by Kate Blanchett and her co-star Jeffrey Rush, Walsingham was influential in Elizabeth's court, but not nearly the way the films make him out to be. He
Hmm.
was an advisor, but yeah, I get where you're going with it. You're absolutely right. But Richelieu,
Yeah.
oh, he was everything he was billed to be back in the
And
day.
and one of the main plot points in the book is that Queen Anne is having an affair with the Duke of Buckingham. Now, if you look at the actual historical dates, she was talking about George, the first Duke of Buckingham, which he was the lover of James the First.
Hmm.
So, gay boy. He was a gay man. So the chances of them actually having an affair pretty slim. So that was definitely an invention for the book. Now,
Hmm.
Buckingham does appear in a lot of the adaptation. He was a real person. He was kind of England's version of Dick Cheney at the time because he was a bit of a warmonger. After James the First died and he helped put James the Second on the throne, he did do a lot of wars for personal gain. So he was very
Oh yeah.
definitely a Dick Cheney kind of guy in England.
Hmm. Yeah, but where Dumois, I gotta get used to that pronunciation. Dumois, um, yeah, he ties it together quite nicely in his novel, and like you said, filmmaker or say screenwriters over the years have taken certain liberties with Dumas' material to introduce some elements that weren't there in the book or
Hmm.
books, depending on how you look at it. But yeah, Dumas was a very fascinating character and wrote, a timeless classic. I mean, Hollywood has been adopting various versions of the Three Musketeers for as long
And
as
the
I
Count
can
of Monte
possibly remember.
Cristo is
Oh
another
yeah,
adventure.
Count of Monte Cristo is another one. Exactly, exactly. I mean, just off the top of my head, I can remember the Jim Caviezel version of Christo.
Hmm.
There's the Richard Chamberlain version back in the 70s, and Chamberlain's in a version of the Three Musketeers back in the
Yeah, in the
day. So
70s.
in the 70s as
the
well.
the early adaptations of the Three Musketeers, if you take away all the animated
Yeah.
adaptions, which there have been
Yeah.
plenty,
Mhm.
including the Disney characters, Mickey, Donald, and Goofy were the version of the Three Musketeers at one point. You had the first live action adaptions of the Three Musketeers in the silent film era.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then after that, in the 30s and the 40s, you had lots of famous people playing the three. I believe even Errol Flynn was in an adaptation of the Three Musketeers.
Yeah, it sounds like his kind of a role. I wouldn't
Yeah.
be surprised if he was.
Let's see what. So fan the witch. James also fanned the witch craves flames and the demon. Yep,
Yeah,
absolutely.
true.
James the First was a bit of a religious fanatic. He put on his own English version of the Salem witch trials, which were also going on under his rule in the colonies at the same time in Massachusetts in the Jamestown colony area. So yeah, he
Mhm.
was a bit of a religious fanatic.
Absolutely.
But so anyway, but we get to what is my favorite adaptation of the Three Musketeers, even though it's not a true adaptation, but the heart of the story is there, and that is 1993's Walt Disney's The Three Musketeers,
Yeah.
star-
Absolutely.
mm, starring Oliver Platt as Porthos, Charlie Sheen as Aramis, Kiefer Sutherland as Athos, and a very young Chris O'Donnell as D'Artagnan, and the scene stealing Tim Curry as Cardinal Richelieu.
Oh, that man. There are certain roles that you give Tim Curry a little bit of stuff and he can just do a lot with it. And Richelieu, as a historic character gives him a lot to do, and even in those places where I guess Curry is kind of filling in the gaps, just that the dress of the era, the look, the pointed face, the beady eye, the
Mhm.
wild eyes,
Yep.
and just everything else. Curry just absolutely. It's some of it's over the top and some of it's campy, but God, he makes that character so believable. He
Oh, yeah.
really does.
I think Disney just said, "Play this campy." This is
Yeah,
lighthearted, this is a family film, play it funny, and that's what he did. I mean, he was in Clue, he was in Oscar, he played just like he did in Clue and Oscar. I mean, Pennywise the Dancing Clown and now that was terrifying, but there was still comedic camp when he played that role, but he's a master of that.
yeah. The director on the '93 version of the Three Musketeers was Stephen Herrick, and I would have given a lot to have heard the conversations that went on
Mhm.
between Curry and Stephen Herrick, the director, about how they wanted to handle this. Um, but I mean, honestly, it's some films are just cast so well, and I don't know how much, and I'm sure there was a lot of thought put into it, but Kiefer Sutherland, Charlie Sheen, and Oliver Platt, and if I remember correctly, this was the first film that I really remember Oliver Platt being in.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm sure he'd been acting in other things, but it's the first time I ever really noticed him. And it just they work so well
Yeah.
together.
It
They
was his
really
first
did.
starring role. I remember
Mm,
him, I believe he was in Working Girl with, Melanie Griffith, Harrison Ford. He was a very, very small role, but I remember him being
mhm.
in that.
Yeah.
Just like David Duchovny was also in that movie in a
Wow.
very small role.
God, I gotta go
Um,
back and watch that one.
oh, yeah. So, yeah, I remember him, but this is the first one he really shined as one of the leads. I mean, there was 5 leads in this movie, and he was one of the 5 leads.
And even the supporting cast. I mean, you had a bunch of people. I mean, for example, you had Roachfort being played by a great character actor who plays a lot of villains, Michael Wincott. He's
Mhm,
absolutely amazing. You had a very young Julie Delpy playing
mhm.
Constance.
Rebecca
You just
De Mornay.
yeah, one of the women that I'd still put her on my list of future ex-wives. You know, you know,
She was really she's good at playing a villain. I mean, did you see her in The Hand That Rocks the Cradle?
that is a film I really need to watch. I'm not gonna lie. I have never seen it. I've heard about it.
Mhm,
And back in that period of her life, I mean, don't get me wrong, Rebecca De Mornay is still a good looking lady, but
mhm,
the idea of playing the seductress Lady De Winter,
mhm.
oh, that role was just made for her the way she played it.
And the Lady De Winter in the Dumois novels was a femme fatale. She
Yeah.
was absolutely a femme fatale. She, had been a lifelong criminal. She did not she did not it did not bother her to murder, including murdering her own not her own husband, but her own brother-in-law.
Hmm.
She worked for Cardinal Richelieu and would remove his enemies. I mean, she was a perfect femme fatale. I mean,
Oh
literally,
yeah.
she could have been they could have based Silk Stockings on her, though USA shows Silk Stockings
Yep.
about the femme fatales.
Yep.
She was definitely. I really wish they had played that up more in this movie. She was just more like that's one of my few complaints is that they kind of played her up like a one-dimensional, just mean girl rather than what she really was in the book.
I agree with you, but you get a little bit of the taste of the character, the Lady De Winter from the
Mhm,
novels, in that exchange between the Cardinal and the Lady De Winter, where the Cardinal tries to put a move on the Lady De Winter in the film, and all of a
mhm.
sudden he feels a blade at his balls,
Yeah.
and the great line, and I'm probably getting a little ahead of myself, but I apologize. The great line is, well, he says, "One snap of my fingers, and I could have your head back on the block." And Rebecca De Mornay, as the Lady De Winter, says, "Yes, and with one flick of my wrist, I could change your religion." And oh, oh. I went,
Exactly,
yeah. I
exactly.
mean, I'm trying to remember. Hang on, I'm going to admit to cheating just a very little bit. The screenwriter for the Three Musketeers. Give me 1 second here. Oh, come on, Brian. you got this. The screenwriter who adapted Dumas' material was just, he really gave these folks some great lines to work with. And the one thing about the dialogue in the Three Musketeers, yeah, there's a little bit of modern modern phraseology, everything else, which I get it. You're trying to make a family movie that kids are going to want to watch, and parents are going to want to come back to again. But even still, they gave a lot. They tried as much as they could to give you the flavor of that era without really deep diving into the novels. But
I
the
mean,
screenwriting,
yeah,
the screenwriting on the
the
film's good.
the screenwriting, the novels are not for children,
No,
and so
absolutely not.
Disney could not have produced a even the animated versions of the Three Musketeers are watered down. Even the ones that
Mhm.
stick pretty very well to the novel eliminate a lot of stuff because you can't show that. I mean, D'Artagnan, they were all ladies' men, let's put it that way, and they had a lot of affairs. They had a lot of sex in the novel, not always consensual. That's all I'll say.
Mhm.
Um, there was a lot of murder. There was a lot of blood. There was a lot of espionage that you couldn't do that
Yeah.
to put that in front of children.
Yeah. And the screenwriter on the Three Musketeers from '93 was a gentleman named David Lowery. I know, Robert, I did not know you had a brother who was a screenwriter in Hollywood, so congratulations, my friend. The stuff we find out about our audience members,
Mhm.
just saying. Oh, Kiefer Sutherland as Athos was amazing.
Oh,
He really
he
was.
and really good. Kiefer
Yeah.
Sutherland can do just about anything. He's a lot like his father, Donald, that he can adapt to just about any role.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
who was it that I always forget his name, but I'm looking it up right now. The little guy that kept chasing,
Oh,
uh,
Paul
yeah,
McGann.
yeah, that kept
Gerard.
yeah, they kept chasing and just screaming at D'Artagnan the whole time.
Yeah.
That was fun. That
Yeah.
was fun.
So you're the being Irish has its advantages apparently, so there you go. There you go, my man. There you go,
But it was
Robert.
funny. These were all Americans and one Brit playing
Hmm.
French.
Yeah, it's really, yeah, it's just really really funny. I mean, it just so well. It was so well cast. I mean, and
Mhm.
and the chemistry, and let's. Oh my goodness, she did
Hey,
show up. Hey, lovely, how you doing?
hey, thank you so much
Ah,
for joining us. And a big thank you out there to everyone. Brian and I often get caught when we talk about movies, we often get caught up in it and we just we ignore everyone and we don't mean to. I'll try to be better and I do apologize for that.
no, but Zia, cook, honey. Save us a plate of whatever it is you're cooking. We'll be
Mm,
over to get it after we're done. Don't worry about
yeah.
it. Yeah,
But
but
yeah.
yeah, Zia, Robert, Adam,
Mhm.
all of y'all, we're
Yep,
glad you guys are here. Like I
absolutely.
say, these movies are just a load of fun.
They are.
And I sent out an invitation to Zia. I said, "Hey, come hang out and chat."
Mhm.
These are a couple of really good '90s movies because I know she's like a huge movie buff,
Yeah.
as is everybody here tonight. But
Zia, tell us about your opinion of these two movies, 93's Three Musketeers and 98's the Man in the Iron Mask. Have you seen them? Do you like them? What's your opinion? Let us know.
yeah, I mean, yeah, but I mean, by all means, I mean, the more chat, the merrier. So don't
Yeah.
worry, Tracy and I can just chew up all the verbal real estate that you can imagine. But yeah, by all means, guys, if you've got opinions about these films, drop them in chat.
Or any of the actors or interesting trivia facts about the actors and actresses, go ahead.
Yeah,
Please throw
oh
them
yeah,
out there.
yeah. But the casting on the Three Musketeers is great. The soundtrack, I mean, I'm like you. You give it a 10 out of 10. I could do that right now too, and not even think twice about it. There are a handful of movies that I will. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. If I find out they're on, it's like screw it. I don't go mow grass. No,
Yeah.
I ain't mowing grass. I'm gonna sit down and
Now,
watch this
no
movie.
one really flips channels anymore because
No.
everybody's disconnected, but back in the day, anytime I was flipping channels and either of these movies was on, I was stopping and watching it no matter
Oh yeah.
where it was in the script. I was stopping and I was watching it.
Oh, absolutely. And it just, yeah, I mean, it's,
Mhm.
yeah. Zia, my darling, I
Yep.
really recommend take a night with you and Sir Nicholas and rewatch, Three Musketeers from '93 because you will have it's a good date night movie. It's a good any kind of movie, date night
Yeah.
movie, family
Family
movie,
movie, alone.
whatever you want to do with it. It's just it's just a load of fun. And like I
It's
say,
fun.
oh, and Oliver Platt. I mean, we talk about Tim Curry as Richelieu, but Oliver Platt as Porthos is just freaking hysterical.
I know, and Porthos is kind of a in all of the Dumas novels, he is kind of a gluttonous, hedonist, kind of guy. I mean, he's into the ladies, the richer the better. He loves food, he loves drink. That and Oliver Platt did a really good job portraying him as such.
Well, then, and you take it 5 years later when you get to the Man in the Iron Mask,
Mhm,
and you cast Gerard Depardieu like the
mhm,
one of the best film exports France ever gave the world,
mhm,
and you cast him as Porthos, and
mhm.
you know, and we haven't got to it. Obviously, we will, but man, Depardieu has got some lines in Man in the Iron Mask, and one of them is one of my personal life mottos, which I'll just, if you'll permit
Yeah.
me, just there's a moment where Depardieu's character of Porthos looks at Jeremy Irons, who's playing Aramis, and says, "We must all have our faith, Aramis. That's why we must eat, drink, and make love to life." And I thought, God, what a beautiful sentiment. Eat,
Yep.
drink, and make love to life. I am down
Mhm,
with that. That is a
mhm.
gorgeous sentiment.
And the irony of ironies is they had Charlie Sheen cast as Aramis, who was the very religious and eventually quit the Musketeers to become a monk.
Yeah. Yeah, just really interesting, really interesting. Zia,
Interesting
you
casting choice.
you enjoy dinner, my dear, and
Thank
I
you.
we love you, darling. Come on back anytime.
But let's
Go ahead.
talk about how it differs from the novel, which is
Go
a
ahead.
lot.
Yeah, it
Um,
does. It really does.
basically, there is no love story between Queen Anne and the Duke of Buckingham.
Mhm.
There is no intrigue with them trying to get the diamonds that she gave him as a gift back so that the king doesn't find out about their affair. Um, really, there's not uh, a whole lot of political espionage and intrigue in this. Basically, instead of how we know the factual Louis the 13th and Queen Anne were, you have an older, almost elderly by that day's
Sure.
standards, king and a young queen to produce an heir. In this one, you have basically two preteens that
Yeah.
have just been married and they're just children, very naive. So instead of Cardinal Richelieu trying to prevent Buckingham's invasion of France by blackmailing him with the affair, you have him conspiring with the Duke of Buckingham to invade England because he's about to take the king and queen hostage and use them to strengthen his own power.
Exactly. Exactly.
So it's very, very different, very, very different plot line. And you have, of course, him basically dismantling the Musketeers to prevent them from protecting the king and queen. And then in the end, you have our four heroes ride through and basically summon all of the Musketeers back to protect the king one final time.
Yep.
And they
Yeah.
storm the palace.
Yeah, absolutely amazing and very well done. Talking about the preteens, there's the gentleman who played Louis. What would this have been? Louis the 13th?
Louis the
Yeah, it
13th.
would have been Louis the 13th. An actor named Hugh O'Connor, but the Queen Anne is played by a very very young Gabrielle Anwar,
Mhm,
which for gentlemen who are and ladies too, for anyone watching this live stream, is like, Gabrielle Anwar, where do I remember her from? I'll give you two different things. Do you remember the tango scene in Son of a Woman? That's
mhm,
Gabrielle Anwar. You remember the television show on USA Network, Burn Notice?
mhm.
That is Gabrielle Anwar. She has been around Hollywood a long time.
Ironically,
And
also another Chris O'Donnell movie, The Scent of a Woman. Chris O'Donnell and Al
yeah,
Pacino.
yeah, absolutely. Which is another great film. Oh
Oh,
Lord.
that's one of my favorite movies of all time. It's in my top 10 for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, sometimes Hollywood gives out the Academy Award because they're like, yeah, we really should have given it to the guy a lot sooner. But oh yeah, Pacino absolutely earned his Oscar.
Mhm.
Absolutely earned it. But yeah, Gabrielle Anwar is in this. Hugh O'Connor is in this '93 version of the Three Musketeers, and they do very well together. The
Yeah.
chemistry,
For
for the
what they're
screen.
giving, they have chemistry. They're in
Yeah,
love, unlike the real Anne and the real Louis XIII, which was
yeah,
simply a political arrangement. Now, a
yeah,
lot of European marriages
sure,
of royalty, they were marriages of political power. Very few actually fell in love. There's a few, but for the most part, they did. He did his thing, she did hers, and they came together to give the kingdom an heir. They did their duty, so
yep,
kind of thing. But they were portrayed as very much in love, and they were being taken advantage of by Cardinal Richelieu.
yeah, yeah.
And
And you see it, you get, even though Tim Curry is being a little bit campy, which is probably being kind to him in this, even though he's being a little bit campy, you get that feeling of, he is a political chess player. He is a political maneuverer in this film, and you get to see all of his machinations, and some of them reference back to time before even the setting of the film, things
mhm,
that he's done in the past, things he's trying to do for the future, and you realize, yeah, even though Curry is just being a little over the top with his character, you realize this guy has a very menacing maneuverability about him when it comes to his politics, because
yeah,
he's thinking beyond just France. He's not just, yes, he's trying to obtain power for himself. Yes, he's trying to consolidate the power he has, but you also think, okay, I got to move this piece on the board to make this thing happen so I can benefit myself down here in France. It's a lot of that comes through the film.
yep, absolutely. He did a really good job portraying that. I mean,
Oh yeah.
and Cardinal, and that was very true to the novel because Richelieu was a political maneuverer. I mean,
Oh yeah.
he was, and so they got that part right. They also got the part that there was a little bit of a romance between. So that now we're talking. I guess we're talking about what they got from the novel.
Yeah.
D'Artagnan and Constance had a little bit of a romance going on. Um, Much happier ending in the movie for them than in the book.
Mm,
But they had a little bit of a romance going on, and then you had the backstory of Athos and Lady de Winter.
mm.
Was very true to the book.
Yeah.
So you want to take that, Brian?
Yeah, if I remember it correctly, and help me fill it, because it's been forever since
Yeah.
I've read the books. But in the film, you see this backstory between Kiefer Sutherland's Athos and Rebecca De Mornay's Lady de Winter. And at one time they were lovers. At one time, perhaps even man and wife. And she did something so egregious that it caused him a divide between the love for the woman that I am with versus my duty to my king. And in the
Hmm.
end, even though it's not really fleshed out in the film, you get the idea. Athos chose his duty to his king over the love of his then wife,
Yeah.
and that comes through in the film. And now help me out here, because in the book, help me out, because I cannot remember exactly how this is portrayed.
Very, very similar in the book. They were former man and wife. She was a felon and did
Hmm.
not tell him she had been convicted of murder and other egregious things. And but she was branded with the flower de lis, which was kind of like the scarlet letter of the
Hmm.
day.
Yeah.
And basically, if you caught somebody branded with that, you had permission from the government to kill them because they had done something so egregious.
Hmm.
And he found that on her body. I don't know what they were doing that he never saw it on her body, after a couple of years of marriage, but he finally discovered it and drew his sword to kill her, do his duty, but then felt bad and let her go. So
Yeah.
now let's fast forward. She's back and she's now doing all this espionage. And in the book, whereas in the movie, she decides that she doesn't want this life anymore and she basically jumps to her own death of her own regard. I mean, I think
Hmm.
it was implied that they were going to kill her, but she
Yeah.
jumped. She beat them to the punch. She jumped to her
Yeah.
death, which I think was a very empowering moment in the setting of the story. Not that I'm
Right.
for self deletion, don't get that wrong. In the book, they basically go and they corner her, they capture her, they try her, the Musketeers try her, they find her guilty, and they have an actual executioner, the executioner of Lille, actually take her out on a boat and behead her. So very, very different story, same ending, essentially.
Yep. Yep. And again, talking about, casting and chemistry,
Mhm,
Kiefer Sutherland and Rebecca De Mornay play off each other so well in this. You especially there's a scene at the dock when the Lady De Winter is trying to get away,
mhm.
and Athos rides up on a horse, and he looks and realizes just the look in Kiefer Sutherland's eyes. It's like, no, not you,
Yeah,
anybody but you. And it's not a repulsion. It's just this awful, sad realization that he realizes I'm going to have to go through all this again. I drink myself silly trying to get over this, and now you're standing right in front of me, and you're at the heart of this intrigue that I'm now having to try to stop.
yeah.
And the scene at the cliff in the film, you get
Mhm,
that same. They're looking. I mean, just the looks that Kiefer Sutherland and Rebecca De Mornay give back and forth to each other in that scene at the cliff
mhm.
is just hauntingly well done.
Oh, it
And
is.
yeah,
It is.
it really is.
Right. And then, of course, the romance between D'Artagnan and Constance.
Mm, mm,
Very happy ending there. You get the idea they're going to be more than friends at the end of the movie, and then, but in the book, very very different. She ends up being kidnapped as a pawn because she's close to the queen, and ends up dying in the book, poisoned by Lady De Winter
mm.
to get at D'Artagnan. So very different endings, but they do bring in some of the elements of the book.
Yeah, yeah,
And then, of course, the
absolutely.
final sequence where the Musketeers charge the palace and they're fighting the Cardinal's guards, just iconic.
Yeah, and again, it's a Michael Kamen soundtrack, and you hear, I mean, the mega song that came out of that movie was, like Tracy said, it's "All for Love" by Sting, Rod Stewart, and Brian Adams. And in that scene in the courtyard, you hear a trumpet version of, the chorus of that song, and it's so well done. And then Kiefer Sutherland lets go the line, "Save the king," and then the battle ensues, and it's just
Mhm.
riotously good.
Yeah.
Just you
And
feel
they
like
do
you want to
save the
find a
king.
yeah.
They do save the king, and you have the final duel between D'Artagnan and the Cardinal's lieutenant. I always forget his
Richelieu,
name.
Richelieu.
Richelieu.
No, excuse me,
Richelieu.
Rochefort, Rochefort.
Yeah, Rochefort. And they end up with Rochefort dead. However, in the book, D'Artagnan and Rochefort end up being kind of rivals throughout the rest of the novels, but they end up
Mhm,
being friends. Like they
yeah,
save each other's lives a couple of times. So I like the book
mhm.
ending for those characters a lot better than the movie. But
Well, and again, I mean, I keep going back to the casting, and my apologies to folks who are watching this live stream right now, but Michael Wincott, who plays Rochefort in The Three Musketeers, I mean, much like Tim Curry, I mean, he's got one of those characters, and he's got that kind of persona. And probably the reality is he's probably a really nice guy off screen. He plays so many villains, it just seems to come naturally to him. But, Michael Wincott has got this character, and, it's been, I mean, Christopher Lee did a version of Rochefort, and other people have too. But he's got this character to work with. He's got that kind of, dark persona about him anyway. And Michael Wincott absolutely shines as, this evil henchman Rochefort that's working for the Cardinal. And, the duel between Chris O'Donnell and uh, and Michael Wincott's characters at the end of the film, yeah, it's very well done.
and
Very,
welcome,
very well done.
thank you for coming in tonight, M16.
Hello, Lana. Mwah, darling. Yes, glad to see you. Glad to see you sashaying into the room. We appreciate that.
But yeah, great ending. All they save the king and all is well. And then at the
Mm,
end, basically the other three musketeers retire. Aramis becomes a monk,
mhm.
takes the cloth, becomes clergy. Porthos marries his lover, who's a rich woman, because her husband dies. And that happens in the book. All the endings for the characters are the same as
Yeah,
they are in the book. Athos, who was a of nobility, he retires to his country estate and remarries and raises a family. And D'Artagnan becomes a lieutenant in the Musketeers and goes on to rise pretty high in the ranks.
yep. And that more or less although we don't get that exact ending in the Three Musketeers, it's a feel good movie where at the end, the good guys win, the bad guys lose,
Hmm.
and you're kind of left wondering, so what did happen to these guys? Which I guess serves as a bridge to Man in the Iron Mask, a
Yep.
completely different film, even though it's the same characters, with the exception of Richelieu and Rochefort and the Lady de Winter. Same characters, same country,
Hmm.
slightly different story,
Very different
and,
story, but
yeah, and there's a
same set of
lot of contrast
characters.
and
But
a serious contrast.
Dumas wrote that story too, and it's the
Mhm.
last of the Musketeer stories. And basically, it's them 30 years later.
Mm. Yeah, and the interesting thing from one film to another, and we were talking about this backstage, is you know with the Disney version of the Three Musketeers, you get this fun, bright, funny, happy sort of story that kids can watch, families can watch, whatever. Then with Wallace's, and yes, it was Randall Wallace who wrote and directed The Man in the Iron Mask from
Hmm.
'98, and you get this film that is darker, not just in terms of use of color or settings, but it's darker in terms of story.
Hmm.
Um, it's played with more maturity,
Hmm.
especially given the actors who are involved, especially the time frame of the characters. Um, I mean, again, and Randall Wallace is just one of those screenwriters that just, I mean, you think Braveheart, you think Man, the Iron Mask, the other things he's been involved in over the years.
Hmm. I remember him in The Crow.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
was sinister in The Crow.
yeah, and you know, it's just, again, I remember the weekend that Man in the Iron Mask opened up in '97 or '98. It was actually it was '97, I think it was the same year Titanic came out.
Yep. Very,
I
very
went
close.
to I went to the movie theater 5 times the
Yeah.
same weekend to watch Man in the Iron Mask. That is how much I was in love with it. It was
Very good
just that
movie. I
good
mean,
for me.
the novel is dark. It's not a
Very.
fun, well, the entire story in the novels, they're mid. I mean, they're good, but they're not light, they're not dark, but it takes a really dark turn in The Man in the Iron Mask because it was based on a real life prisoner that did die in exile. So they had to kind of tell that story how he got there. And Dumas takes one of the rumors in that there was actually twins born to Louis the 13th and Anne, and one of them had to be hidden. They didn't want to kill the child. One of them had to be hidden to prevent anarchy
Yep.
because you have two twin brothers born a minute apart.
Yeah.
Anytime there's a secession crisis, what happens to a country? It usually devolves into civil war.
Absolutely. And it is so funny to, well, I shouldn't say funny, that's not the right word. It is so it was an early display of the talents of Leonardo DiCaprio
Yeah.
that he could play these two sons of a king,
Hmm.
Philippe and his
Philippe and
brother
Louis
Louis
the 14th.
and Louis the 14th, and just polar opposites of each other in
Yeah.
terms of attitude, how they treat people, what they think of their subjects, and just it's just extraordinary. I mean, like I said, yeah, DiCaprio had been around Hollywood for a while. I mean, What's Eating Gilbert Grape? Obviously,
Yep.
Titanic had come out, and right after he did
He was on God, can't think of
Quick,
it, but
Quick and the
The Kirk
Dead,
Cameron sitcom, he was in that.
Growing Pains,
Growing Pains. Not
yeah,
growing yeah, Growing Pains. He was in Growing
yeah,
Pains.
Growing Pains, What's Eating Gilbert Grape, The Quick and the
Right.
Dead, and he just filmed Titanic, and then went straight to France to film Man in the Iron Mask, and yeah, he'd been around Hollywood for a while, but nobody really had a really good handle on how good of an actor he could be, which of course he's proven that since then, like
Yep.
8 different Oscar nominations, and he's now won the Academy Award finally.
Mhm.
But in these characters of Louis and Philippe, you really get a chance to see how well or how much talent is there yet to be seen just by the way he plays these two characters.
Yeah.
He's just
Totally
extraordinary.
different. Plays them totally different. You can
Oh,
really
yeah.
see They do make minor modifications to his hair a little bit so you can tell them apart, but it's
Yeah.
really not hard to tell them
Mhm.
apart because they are such different characters. Louis the 14th, very much based on the historical Louis the 14th,
Yeah.
very egotistical, kind of cruel. Um, yeah. Philippe was smuggled out of Paris and raised in the country by a average working class couple until Athos, now played by uh, John Malkovich, finds him and basically, along with Aramis, basically smuggles him in because basically this one follows the novel very closely.
Okay.
Um, Basically, you had Athos remarrying after he retired, and he had a son by the name of Raoul, played in the movie by Peter Skarsgård.
Yeah,
And
very
basically,
young Peter
yep,
Skarsgård.
yep, very young. And Peter Skarsgård was in love, was in the art, had joined the Musketeers, was doing a great job. D'Artagnan is still a Musketeer. In fact, he's head of the Musketeers. He's the personal bodyguard to Louis the 14th. He has a lot of respect for Raoul, not only because he is a good Musketeer, but because he is the son of his old friend Athos. So he kind of watches over him and takes care of him. And then you have King Louis the 14th wanting to clap the cheeks, for no other, not another better way to say it, of Raoul's fiancee. And
Mhm.
so he basically has Raoul removed, has him kind of like David in the Bible, has Bathsheba's husband sent to the front
Uriah.
lines.
Mhm.
Same thing here, has him purposely put into battle where he will be killed.
Yep.
And Athos is not under any delusions that that's not what happened. So Athos pretty much is determined to use Philippe to kidnap uh, Louis and basically switch out the kings.
Yep.
And he has Aramis, now played by Jeremy Irons, assisting him in this plot. And
Yeah, and
Porthos eventually. No,
mhm.
in the book, Porthos knew about it and was a co-conspirator. In the movie, as I recall, Porthos did not know about it.
Mm. Well, the and even how they come up with the plot in the film is done so extraordinarily well
Mm,
because for people who haven't seen the film, there's a great scene where you see this beautiful church or abbey or what have you, and the next moment you see Jeremy Irons, who's playing the role of Aramis, and Gerard Depardieu is playing Porthos, and they're descending the set of stairs,
mhm,
and uh, Depardieu says to Irons, "Aramis, uh, are we are we on our way to hell?" And Jeremy Irons is like, "Hell may be our destination, Porthos, but not on this trip." And they walk into this room, and there are two doors on either side. Through one door opens, walks in D'Artagnan, played by Gabriel Byrne. The other
mhm,
door opens, and in walks Athos, and they both realize they're there, and they've had their confrontation by that point in the film. And
mhm,
it's like, what are and again, this is great acting.
mhm.
Gabriel Byrne and John Malkovich exchange a look like, "What the hell are you doing here? What the hell are you doing here?"
Because they've
And
since
then,
had a falling out
yeah,
over
because
the
they've
death
had a
of
falling
Raoul.
over the death of Raoul. And from there, the plot is hatched, and Jeremy Irons tells them what he's going to do and cryptically doesn't tell them how he's going to do it. And it's again much like Three Musketeers. It's so well acted, and again, Randall Wallace is just a superb scriptwriter, and it's handled so well in the writing and even better in the acting. You
Mhm.
just you're like, ooh, something's getting ready to happen here, but I can't quite figure out where they're going with this. This should be interesting. So yeah, very well done in both settings.
Yep. And like you said, that they had the falling out over the death of Raoul because Athos blamed D'Artagnan for letting his son be sent to the front lines.
Hmm.
Really, that's what it boiled down to. And so D'Artagnan wants no part of any plot. So they pretty much keep the details from him, and he goes back to his post as bodyguard to the king, chief bodyguard to the king. And then the others basically switch out through there's a party going on, and they basically lure the king out and they make the switch after
Mhm.
training Philippe to act like his brother, and they put him on the throne. And then there is a diplomat who notices the difference, and then there's another switch, and then another switch back. They switch it like twice. Same thing happens in the novel, that there's
Yeah,
continuing switches.
yeah, and I love the way that Randall Wallace frames it in in the dialogue in the film The Man in the Iron Mask, because it's you could, even if you didn't know what was going on, you could actually side with Aramis's thinking, because at one point he turns to Athos and says, "I am offering you a revolution without blood, without violence, and it is permissible because he too, talking about Philippe, he
Mhm.
too is the son of a king.
And
And if you're
remember,
going to, yeah, go
no,
ahead.
no, Aramis is a cardinal by this time. He has risen through the ranks of the clergy and is now a cardinal. He's not just a
Mm.
monk anymore.
Yeah, and you're sitting there when you're watching the film, you hear that line, you go, I know these guys are engaging in a very subtle but
Who
effective coup d'état, but you're sitting there thinking to yourself, you know what? This is actually justifiable. You kind of get
Louis the
how
14th
Aramis,
was kind of a cruel king. If you look at history, he was very
yeah,
cruel.
yeah, and you get Aramis's thinking, because it's like justifiable in that it brings about the greater good,
Hmm.
permissible in that you're
No
not
one's dying.
exactly, no one's dying, and you are actually committing a bloodless revolution. And you're sitting there going, "Wow, this guy is a genius," you know,
And being that
truly.
it's a non-democratic society, I mean, this is a absolute monarchy, divine right of kings. So there is no democratic process. So it's either you live under the boot of the king or there's revolution
Yeah,
to make
absolutely.
change. And this is what happened. And
Yeah,
so in the book, it ends with the rightful Louis the 14th back on the throne, and his brother Philippe sentenced to wear an iron mask and live in exile. D'Artagnan takes him and leaves him in exile. Not the same way here, though, in the movie. The movie actually has a very happy ending, as far as that goes. But basically, you have it coming out, the twist of all twists, that D'Artagnan is the father of both of the boys, Louis and uh,
Philippe.
Philippe, which really
Well,
puts a twist on the Three Musketeers if you think back to how Queen Anne was portrayed in that movie.
and the interesting part about it is I mean, like I say, the drawn parallels between the two films,
Yeah,
it
in the
just,
novel, he was the older brother. I'm not sure. I can't remember the film,
yeah,
whether or not he was the older brother.
yeah, it just and again, Randall Wallace is just such a good writer. You get the foreshadowing that D'Artagnan's role in this is more than just a bodyguard to the king, because when Aramis is explaining to
Hmm.
in the film, when Aramis is explaining to Philippe what happened as to why he wore an iron mask for those 6 years, he recounts the story of the night that Louis was born, and Philippe.
Hmm.
And then Gerard Depardieu looks over at Malkovich's character and says, "I remember that night. You and D'Artagnan and I were dining together, and D'Artagnan was dead drunk. I'd never seen him like that before." And Malkovich's like, and he goes, like, "Yeah, I remember that." And you got the foreshadowing in that moment. D'Artagnan's something to these two young men,
Besides
Philippe,
Bodyguard,
and aside from Bodyguard, and it's just, again, a credit to Randall Wallace's ability to write. Just, you really done very well.
right? And so he was having an affair with the queen. She got pregnant, and then they did what they did with the twins, which is actually bringing in two rumors about Louis the 14th into one into the from history into the movie that was not in the novel. So good on the screenwriter there as well. He took
Yeah,
another historical rumor and somehow brought it into the movie in a very fun way.
yeah, and the reverse happens in the film from the book, whereas in the book, Philippe is sent to live out his life in the country, and Louis is back on the throne. The Musketeers in this film, managed to install Philippe on the throne, letting everyone believe he is Louis, and send Louis out to the country to live quietly for the rest of his life.
Hmm.
But there is
Without
a
an
set
iron mask. Without an
without
iron
an
mask.
without an iron mask, but there is a price to be paid in the film, which I don't know. And Tracy straightened me out on this, how much this follows the book. In the film, Gabriel Byrne's character D'Artagnan dies,
Hmm.
a very ironic death when you think about what his primary duty was. In the film,
Hmm.
D'Artagnan is killed at the hands of the man who he guards,
Yeah, at the hands of
and
Louis, he tries to protect Philippe and
in
is
in trying to
killed by
protect Philippe.
Louis.
Yeah, and killed by Louis. Now, it would, and again, it's been forever since I've run my fingers through the pages of the actual book. Is that how Dumas portrays what happened, or did that even happen at all?
No, that didn't happen at all.
Okay.
Basically, a diplomat that they're staying in his house where the switch was made figures it out. He rallies the musketeers. They go and they make this, and they make, put Louis back on the throne. And then D'Artagnan is charged with having the Iron Mask made. They put Philippe into it. They put him in the Bastille, where he stayed for years, which is also portrayed in the movie.
Hmm.
Then D'Artagnan moves him to an island off the coast of France
Right.
at the very end of the book and leaves him there.
Mm.
But he's not related to them at all. But
Okay.
D'Artagnan is
Okay.
still alive at the end of the. Because
Yeah.
D'Artagnan was the star of Dumas' novel, so he was still alive at the end of it.
Yeah. And the actress that portrays the Queen Mother, Anne Perilaud, so forgive me if my pronunciation of
Mm-hmm.
French last name is not correct, does a wonderful job.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's said that you can do a lot with stillness as an actor or actress, and
Mm-hmm.
she's not one of those actors in this role that's over the top or outlandish, but just the quiet reserved strength that she portrays through her character is
Mm-hmm.
just, I mean, just done very well,
And you
very,
don't
very
forget, you
well.
also had Hugh Laurie, House himself, as one of Louis XIV's advisors.
Oh gosh, yes. That's just still cracks me up every time I think about it. And I keep thinking, man, it's like watching an episode of Blackadder or something. It's just seeing Hugh
Mm-hmm.
Laurie in this thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
But in the end, basically, Philippe is left on the throne, and then they throw up this thing about what a great king Louis XIV was. He was kind to all his people, which is not historically accurate because he was a warmonger and he was kind of a dick to his people. But it's a nice, cozy, happy little ending to the movie.
Exactly. And you have that great scene at the end where the contrast between, a more mature Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, there's a line of musketeers in their blue tunics.
Hmm.
And one of the great lines in the film is an exchange between uh, Malkovich and Gabriel Byrne, where Malkovich says, "Yes, we wore the uniforms when men were grown, and the uniforms were black." So here are
Hmm.
these three, mature, characters in their black tunics, and at the end they're walking, amidst raised flags and a shout of hurrah, basically,
Hmm.
and a beautiful piece of music, backing it up. It's very well done,
Yep.
very, very well done.
Whereas in the book, they are all brought to justice for their crimes.
Yeah,
I believe Aramis was in prison. The other two were executed. And Aramis was only spared because he was clergy.
yeah, yeah, which would have caused the king a problem with the Pope.
Yep.
So, but yeah, yeah, very, very good film. Both films. I mean, like I say, you can draw, even though, like I said, two separate studios, two separate themes, two separate everything. You can still see how these two films tie so well together.
Yeah.
They really do. You could
Hmm.
see Malkovich being an older version of Keith Sutherland, or Jeremy Irons being an older version of Charlie Sheen's character, or
Yeah.
etc.
The only one that was a little different was Pardue did not strike me as an older Oliver Platt, but
I
he's
agree with you there. I
that's
agree
the
with you
only
there.
one. That's the only
Yeah.
one. And Gabriel Burns, yeah, I could have seen Chris O'Donnell's character maturing into that. A little more battle hardened, a little more duty bound.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But yeah, casting in both the films is great. Script writing in both the films is great. The cinematography is great. The music's great. Folks, like I say, I know I'm sitting here gushing about these two films. And it's like, you know, almost completely uncritical of them. But that's, to me, these films, and they're both now, what, 30 years old? Close to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I say, you know, definitely the Three Musketeers your kids can watch. Maybe you want them to be a little bit more mature before you let them see The Man in the Iron Mask, but still, these are family movies depending on the age of your kids and, you know, how you trust their maturity level to watch them. Kids can watch them,
Yep.
date night, whatever. It's a great movie either way.
There are there are animated versions of both these movies that well, the Tim Curry, that this movie's great for kids. That they want the story of the Man in the Iron Mask, and there are animated versions of it that kind of
Yes,
water down the violence that are much better than this.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and yeah, definitely. If you're looking for a good date night movie, family movie, whatever, just or you know, Saturday night around the house by yourself, pop popcorn. I want to watch something. Put these on. They're just
Definitely,
that good. They really
definitely.
are.
I like I said, I give them both 10 out of 10. The only criticism I can have of the Three Musketeers is it did not follow the novel, but I understand why. I have no criticisms of the Man in Iron Mask. It's just a great movie.
Yeah. Like I say, I can't even begin to count now how many times I've watched that movie over the years.
Hmm.
And we'll keep on doing it for as long as I'm able to do so. You
Yeah,
know, it doesn't
me
matter if
too.
I'm watching it online, on television somewhere, on a cable, whatever. I'll watch it. It's
Hmm.
just that good.
There's, like I said, it's just one of those movies that if I were to have found it like in progress somewhere, I would stop and watch it from wherever it was. I would
Yep.
watch it through to the end. There's a few
Absolutely.
movies that are like that for me. The other one would be Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves is
Mm,
another one that I do that,
yeah.
and one of my all-time favorites, Excalibur from 1981. If I see that,
Oh,
I'm stopping and I'm sitting down and I'm watching it.
the soundtrack to that is just, I
Wagner,
mean,
just it's how I come
yeah.
to love Wagner. It's just
Mm,
you
the
take
sc-
Wagner's concertos and you just drop King Arthur in the middle of it. You know,
Yeah, and the scene where Percival is riding back to the field of battle and he comes to the edge of the beach and he sees Arthur's body being taken away to Avalon, and you have that
Lon.
crescendo of Wagner, and it's just like, oh God,
Oh
it's
yeah.
just glorious. Mm.
Guess what? Let's do that one next time we're on my channel.
Oh hell yeah.
You want to talk about Excalibur?
Yeah, hell yeah. I'll do it. I'm down for that, dear. You know, a heartbeat. That's good. Now, folks. I'm gonna tease you right now. What happens when you take a very young and a hot Helen Mirren, throw her in with a young Liam Neeson, and a slew of great British actors and actresses? Mix in the Arthurian legend, throw in some Wagner for the soundtrack. You get maybe one of the best tellings of the Arthurian legend that
Mhm.
you will ever see done in film. To me,
It's
this is the gold standard by which you measure every King Arthur movie.
Yeah,
I don't
there
care
is
when it
no
is.
other King Arthur movie, whether it's animated or live action, that has captured the essential Le Morte d'Arthur by Thomas Mallory, which is the
Mhm.
quintessential version of Arthur's story. Better, this is the only movie that tells it start to finish. This is the only movie that tells it. Everything else, it only tells a portion of the story. Uh,
And there's a very young Gabriel Byrne in Excalibur, so
Excalibur,
there's got to tie into what we're talking about tonight.
right. The only
So
other two Arthurian movies that I'll even watch is the old Disney Sword in the Stone, just because
yeah,
it's classic.
yes, classic animation.
And but that only tells part of the story. It only tells his childhood up until he draws the sword.
Agreed.
Um, and Monty Python and the Holy Grail is another good, but it only tells. I mean, literally, it has it has a lot of the
Yeah,
legend in it. It's just
yeah.
funny. And yep,
Yeah, it's
they end up living
absolutely
together
true.
after that.
Absolutely true.
And but it only tells the story of Arthur through the quest for the Holy Grail. Nothing starts all the way back with Uther Pendragon and goes forward to the death of Arthur, which is the only
Yeah.
Excalibur is the only one.
Yeah, and Nicole Williamson, I believe, played the role of Merlin in
Yep.
Excalibur, and just man,
He
Talk about
killed it
another one just ate the
so
screen
well.
up.
He was
Ugh,
comical when he needed to be, and he was
frightening when he needed to be.
foreboding when he needed to be, and frightening when he needed to be. And interesting, Helen Mirren, who played Morgana, they Arthur's half sister, they had worked together on a stage play in Ireland and had butted heads, her and Nicholas, and
Really?
they hated each other. They
Huh.
hated each other. And the director brought them together and says, "Is this going to be a problem?" And they basically said, "No, we're professionals. We'll make it work." And by the end of the movie, they had kind of buried the hatchet, but they hated each other. But they had chemistry. I don't care
Oh, yeah,
what
they
was
were
going. They
amazing
had
together.
chemistry. Maybe it
They
was
were
the hate
amazing.
flowing through them.
Oh, yeah, and yeah, again, Helen Mirren is on the list of of women who could be future ex-wives with me. I don't care how old she is now.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, back then, whoo, Stone Cold Fox. Whew.
yeah. I could talk about Excalibur all day.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, and people look at it. I had a friend watch it, and she goes, "Those fights are just clunky and they're not fun." She's used to the fights that you see in like Game of Thrones and other fantasy where it's all well choreographed. I said, "That's exactly what a fight in medieval armor would be like. They're not poetic. They're not dancing around like swans." He made those suits of armor out of aluminum so that they would have some heaviness to them,
Mhm.
so that you would actually know what a real knight was going through. No, they were clunky because they could barely lift their arms, and that's how real medieval knights fought.
Yeah, if you wanted to lose some weight and get in shape, yeah, wear a suit of armor around for a couple 3 months, and believe me, you
Mhm,
will. Your cardiovascular is going to improve. You'll probably lose a lot of weight real quick.
mhm.
Yeah, it will. A suit of armor will put you through a workout,
Yeah, I
no
like
doubt.
what M16 says here is that it is the only one that tells the whole story of Uther to Arthur and Mists of Avalon. Yeah, if you've ever read all of the there's many adaptations in literature of the Arthurian legend, but Avalon is another component to it where it's basically that's where the Lady of the Lake comes from and others. There's a lot of really powerful women that live on Avalon,
Hmm.
and they went and captured. Now this is where there's always been interpreted: was Arthur really dead when they took him away, or was he just being taken away to his reward and was still alive?
Mm.
They never answered that question, and neither does Sir Thomas Mallory.
Well, and then you take it one step further. Most people don't remember this, but C.S. Lewis wrote a space trilogy,
Mhm,
and that was see, it went Out of the Silent Planet, Paralandra, and the third one is called That Hideous Strength.
mhm,
And in the last book, Arthur comes back to life,
mhm.
and it's like, okay, yeah, only C.S. Lewis could pull this off in a space trilogy and get Arthur to come back to life and tie all that together somehow. I have no idea,
Because
but he
what did
made it
Arthur
work.
say? Someday a king will come and the sword will rise again.
Hmm.
It was a whole
Hmm.
lot of Christian elements in the Arthurian
Yeah,
story. And there
yeah.
really was a historical figure that Arthur was based on. He was a Bretonian commander that fought with the Romans to keep the Gauls out. And then, after the Romans abandoned Britain, he fought to keep the Anglo Saxons out, even though eventually the Anglo Saxons won. So there is some historical backstory to Arthur.
Which ties into Clive Owen's version of the King Arthur story that he did some years back with Keira Knightley and a whole bunch of other
Hmm.
great British actors. Stellan
Hmm.
Skarsgård is in that as the villain. Oh
Yep.
yeah, that ties into that very idea. But yeah, if you want to do Excalibur, dear, I'm down for it.
Oh, I'd love to. I'd
Absolutely.
love to. But yeah, there's a whole lot of Christian elements in that.
Yep,
Well,
absolutely.
Arthurian Legends is one of those that there's so many versions of it in literature, and
Hmm.
every time somebody adds to it, the next person to write it takes it all and then adds to it. They don't throw any of that away, which is why it
Yeah,
got so big.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, absolutely. I will be glad to sit down and review Excalibur.
All right, well, we'll do that in 2 weeks. Like I said, I could Or if you want to do it next week on your channel, or we can wait till we're back on my channel. It's
Let's
whatever
bring
you
let's
want to
do
do.
it. Let's do it over on your channel, and then we'll keep the do it that way. I like that
Okay.
idea.
All right.
All right.
Well, with that being said, we're going to give both of these tonight's movies two big enthusiastic thumbs up. Check them out for a good time. And Brian, tell everybody where they can find you. Not that any of these people don't already know, but go ahead.
Well, for those of you out there who have come to this movie review and you're like, who is this guy over here in this funny looking hat and his strange ways? Well, my name is Brian Trippett. I'm known in social media as the Front Porch Conservative. You can find me on Rumble. You can find me on YouTube. You can also subscribe to my channel, daggone it. You can find me on Twitter. My handle is the Front Porch C1. I do live streams Monday through Thursday night, 7:30 Eastern, called Chatting on the Porch. And tomorrow morning at 10:30 a.m. is a regular happening on my channel, which is Front Porch Brunch, where we're kind of doing an end of the week review of items in the news. And as you might imagine, we do have a few things to talk about. So feel free to check me out, subscribe to the channel, and also give this lady a sub. Daggone it, she's working hard and doing a wonderful job at it. So, Tracy, as always, thank you so much for having me on here. It is an absolute joy bouncing, love of movies, back and forth with you. So, yeah, this is a hoot.
Because I think the next time we're on my channel will be the day after the election.
Oh, Lord.
So we will need some fantasy escape.
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
But anyway, everyone, be safe, be good, and we will see you next time. Until next time, Tracy